A gute Woche, a gesunde Woche, a mazel dicke Woche. Yehavchu yamim elu lemoadim ulesimcha. Today was Rosh Chodesh of Aaron HaKoyen's Yortzeit, and we are now ushered into the Yemei Avelus, the 9 days, which I always want you to remember, and I know I said it 3 weeks ago to you, that the 9 days Kadmonim say produce the simcha of the 9 days of Sukkot, because the source of true simcha is when the Geula Shlema will take place, and since on Tisha B'Av Noilad Mashiach, that the Ha'ora, the Ratzon of Mashiach to be Megala himself, is on Tisha B'Av after Mincha. So therefore the source that's going to usher in Yemos HaMashiach, Tchias HaMeisim, and Olam Haba begins with, is on Tisha B'Av. It is for that reason that the Arizal says the three biggest Shabbosos of the year are the three Shabbosos of the 3 weeks. And of the 3 weeks, the biggest is Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbos, it's always Parshas Devarim, that brings us into Tisha B'Av. This year, Tisha B'Av is on a Sunday, Motzoi Shabbos Sunday, so that allows the Shabbos Chazon and Parshas Devarim to be Erev Tisha B'Av, literally. Now, I want to say to you that we call it Shabbos Chazon, but as the Bnei Yisachar tells us, there were two people in most of those generations. One was a Navi and one was a Choyze. Now a Choyze was much lower than a Navi. A Navi, when he was shown a Nevuah, a prophecy, and he said it, it had to happen. Whatever he saw and said was a fact. A Choyze, when he saw a vision and he said it, it did not have to happen. So one of the biggest Nevi'im was Yeshayahu. And he was talking about the Churban, but he didn't want it to have to happen. And the only time that he said over Nevuah that he saw under the umbrella of a Choyze was about the Churban Bais HaMikdash, because he didn't want it to happen. And that's why it's called Chazon Yeshayahu Haftorah, and we refer to it as Shabbos Chazon, so that it should be baked in to the essence of the day, that it doesn't have to happen. That's what he was hoping, that when he said over under the umbrella of a Choyze, even though he was 100% Navi, but he didn't want it to have to happen. And that's why we call it Chazon. Now, I want to stop for just a moment and tell you that this past Sunday was a Yortzeit of Rav Yaakov Yosef, who was the first and last chief rabbi of New York City. And the interesting thing is that a Yid came over to Rav Yehoshua, who was the second Belzer Rebbe. His father was Rav Shalom, the Sar Shalom, the first Belzer Rebbe, and he was a Talmud of the Choize of Lublin. And he was best friends with the Bnei Yissaschar, all of those who were, and they used to refer to the Talmidim and Chasidim of the Choize, that he was running a academy of Rebbes, because so many of those Talmidim became Rebbes in their own dynasties. And the second Belzer Rebbe was Rabbi Yehoshua, and his son was Rabbi Yisachar Dov, and his son was Reb Aaron of Bel de Kodesh Kadoshim Mi Beten Imo. So this Yid came over to Rabbi Yehoshua, who lived like 170 years ago, 160 years ago, and said to him, Rebbe, I would like to sponsor you moving with your Hasidim to America. Now this was like 1850, 1860. And Rabbi Yehoshua answered him and said, I cannot do it, and the reason is because there were never Talmidim and Hasidim of the Baal Shem Tov who lived in America. Because had they lived in America, they would have already drenched the atmosphere, the spiritual atmosphere, with so much Kedusha that it would have been workable for me to uplift the Yidden of America and to accomplish something. But because the way was never paved, it is such a hard upheaval to fight against the Chitzonim and the Samach Mem and their Achiza, their hold on the Avir, the air of the spiritual air and atmosphere of America. But I have an eitzah for you, said Rabbi Yehoshua. And he said, go to the Litvisha, Lita, and you're going to find someone there that could go to blaze the trail. And he went this year, went to the Litvische Yidden, and he found Rav Yaakov Yosef, who moved to America, and he was here for a number of years, and he died from a heart attack from the Agmas Nefesh. The Shachtim Union drove him into the ground, but he would not budge. When they had Shachtim, he went in, and before he allowed them to stamp anything kosher, it had to be processed and done with 100% halachas of kashrus and shchita and everything. And they fought him. And at the end, he had a terrible heart attack and he died. Now, he is buried here in Brooklyn, and thousands go on the day of his yahrzeit because there are hundreds of stories of people who needed a Yeshua, women who couldn't give birth and were married 10 years and 15 years, and they went and cried their hearts out by the kever of this Rav Yaakov Yosef, and they gave birth. And when you go to the cemetery on his yahrzeit, you see the thousands that are there. And that come to daven on the day of his yahrzeit, Zechuso Yogein Aleinu. And I want to talk about one more yahrzeit, which is this week, Tuesday night, Wednesday, the yahrzeit of the Arizal, who's buried in Tzfas and he lived in Eretz Yisrael only 2 years. And the Kadmonim bring from his Tekufa that Eliyahu Hanavi came to him and told him that he should move to Eretz Yisrael, because the whole reason that his neshama came down to Olam Hazeh was to have a Talmud Reb Chaim Vital. Now Reb Chaim Vital lived in Damascus, where his father, Rabbi Yosef Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Levracha, and Mekubolim in his Tekufa 400 years ago said that Rabbi Yosef was so holy and so big that if they took the entire Yiddish tzibur, the whole community of Yidden in the world, half he could stand up to defend and bring them to the right side of the fence. Half of the Yidden of the world, the father of Reb Chaim Vital. So the Arizal immediately moved to Eretz Yisrael, lived in Sfaz, and there are three opinions, and every one of those opinions that bring it down from 200 years ago, whenever it was, to justify and defend and marshal support to their opinion, because there's three opinions how long the Arizal lived. One opinion is 38 years, one opinion is 36 years, and one opinion is 33 years. And each one of the opinions bring a proof of something from a tzaddik that said something about the years of the Arizal, and they defend their position and bring support to their opinion. But all three agree that he lived only into the 30s. He did not hit 40. That everyone agrees. And the Arizal from Reb Shimon Bar Yochai told the Arizal, no major force and authority revealed so much Kabbalah and so much in the world of Nister, of Sod, the secrets of the Torah, and elaborated on the Zohar HaKadosh and revealed through the Kisvei Ari the kavanas of davening and all these secrets that were for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years secret. And he revealed them and explained that the bringing of Mashiach, that there has to be a tekufa of revelation of these secrets, and that's why he did it. Now, he is buried on a mountain in Tzvaz, that when he looked at the mountain, he said, on that mountain where he subsequently was buried, he said, Kiflayim Kiyotzim Mitzrayim are buried on that mountain. Now, Yotzim Mitzrayim were 600,000. We're referring to men who were from age 20 to age 60. And they left Mitzrayim, that's 600,000. And the Arizal said when he looked at the mountain, he said that there's 1,200,000 buried on that mountain. Now, if any of us, like most of us or many of us have been to that mountain, you could add 6,000, 7,000 graves if you went all around the mountain. So there were over the hundreds and hundreds of years, there were layers and layers and layers. If the Arizal said there was over 1 million buried there, there was over 1 million buried there. And he's buried right next to his Rebbe, the Ramak, Reb Moshe Kordavira, who was the Arizal's Rebbe in Kabbalah. His Rebbe in Gemara was the Shita Mekubetzes. That was his Rebbe. And the Arizal walked around Eretz Yisrael because they didn't know where any of the Kvarim over the hundreds of years and the wars and everything that happened. Everything was covered over, everything was, and he would walk and stop and say this is where Rabbi Akiva is buried. This is Reb Chia Ubanov. And that's how they put up the matzevas of who is buried all through Eretz Yisrael. He walked all around the whole Eretz Yisrael and told his Talmidim and Reb Chaim Vital where and who was buried in that spot. So the Arizal is a backbone of much of what happened in Eretz Yisrael, although his short years that he lived, but he accomplished what he had to do in Olam Hazeh, and he was Mashpia L'Doros. And his Yortzeit is Hay of this Tuesday night and Wednesday. Zachuso Yogein Aleinu. Now, I want to say to you that Devarim, which we begin reading this coming Shabbos Chazon, Devarim, the whole Sefer was said in 36 days. The Pasuk says, Achad Asar Yom, that Eila Hadvarim Asher Diber Moshe al Kol Yisrael Ba'ever HaYarden Bo'arava Mol Sof Bein Paran Uvein Lavo V'Lovan V'Di Chatzeros V'Di Zahav V'Chatzeros. And he began saying it Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And he said it for 36 days and finished on Vav Adar. And the very next day, the 37th day, he was Nifter, Zion Adar, Moshe Rabbeinu. And the first three parshios is a reminiscence and Musar, a tochacha to Klal Yisrael before his death. But even in the moments of grief that he talked about what happened, he did not embarrass Klal Yisrael. And that's why you'll find in the first 3-4 psukim that anything he wanted to say, he did in a masqueraded cover-up. He said, for instance, that you were in Paran, and that's where the story of the Meraglim happened. Says Rashi, because he wanted to rebuke them, but he didn't want to humiliate them. So he kept talking about cities, but he was reminding them of the events that took place in those cities so that they wouldn't be over-humiliated. They would just reflect and remember the shame. And Rashi says that Paran was the Meraglim. When he said the city of Chatzeros, that's where the story of Korach with his people happened. And Di Zahav, the place of lots of gold, was where the Egel took place. And when he talked about Bo'arava, it was the Baal Pa'or, that they were Oived Avodah Zarah Nebuch. And when they talked about Uvein Tofel, he was talking about the mon, that the tiflis, the nonsense. Here they could think of anything they wanted it to taste like. And look what they ended up complaining, and so many dying in the Magefa for their senselessness, because Teufel is a lotion of tiflos, senselessness. But he called it the place to remind them of what happened about the mon in that city. Now, Rav Zevin brings a story with the Tiferes Shlomo, who lived like 180 years ago. And was an unbelievable tzaddik. And he used to cloak, as many tzaddikim do, their miracles in derech hateva, in regular, natural. Some people will come to a Rebbe, and the Rebbe, the Rebbe for Parnasa, and the Rebbe will say, did you give your children Hanukkah geld? And this is a true story. And the person said, yeah, I gave Hanukkah geld. Did you give every night? He said, yes. Did you give every child the same amount? And that year, that Yid became a Gevir. Because the Rebbe was giving him a bracha b'derech hateva, so that he created the tzinor, the pipeline, for the bracha to come to the person. And the Tiferes Shlomo was very famous for this. And the Tiferes Shlomo was a Kohen, and some Yid came into his house and said, Rebbe, I am destitute, I don't have bread on the table, and I'm desperate. Please give me a bracha that I should have enough to eat in the house. So the Rebbe said to him, the Chazal say that an oni is choshev kameis. And if you're so poor, like you just said, you're like a mace and I'm a kohen. Please get out of the house. I can't be in a room with a dead body because you're oni choshev kameis. And that's how he cloaked, like in a joke. And Rav Zevin brings in his Sipurei Chasidim this story. So the Yid, out of sheer fright, he told him to get out of the house. He started to run. So he said, no, please come back. That if you're in such a state, you're like a mace mitzvah, and even a kohen gadol could be with the mace mitzvah, so you could stay here in the room. And he said to him, how do you then have parnasa? He said, my wife goes out to the marketplace and tries to sell a little this or a little that, and from that she buys a bread and she buys. So the Rebbe said, this week's Parsha is Shabbos Chazon, and we're reading the Devarim. And at the beginning of Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu in his rebuke refers to Di Zahav, that there was a lot of gold, a reference to the egel that was made. So I want to say to you that since it's the Parsha of Di Zahav, lots of gold, that you should learn the Parsha there and intensely and immerse yourself in the inyanim of the Parsha. And with that, that's the bracha that I give you. And the Yid became a big Gevir. Why? Because of the Di Zahav means Dai Zahav, plenty of gold. The name of the place was Di Zahav. But like Rashi points out, it's a reference to the egel, and it became. So we learn from the Inyan that everything is cloaked, that when we have justification for telling off someone or privately telling him the mistakes he made or something he did, no matter how justified you are, or even with a child sometimes deserves a smack. But it has to be done in a way not to over-humiliate the person and not to bring out such embarrassment that he can't pick up his head. Like I told you with On Ben Peles, his name was not On. I told you then that On is Aninus, and that his wife put him down so badly he could never the rest of his life pick up his head because he was so put down. She saved his life, but he could never pick up his head because she said to him, what are you sticking your neck out? Whether Moshe Rabbeinu wins or Korach wins, you're going to be the nobody. And she stressed so much the nobody that he remained a nobody the rest of his life. And that was not his name, the Gemara says, but he remained in a state of aninus. Now, in the beginning of the parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu began with the words Eila Hadvarim. So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that it could have just started, that Moshe Rabbeinu could have said, the Torah could have said, Hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. The word Eila doesn't have to be stated. It's like extra. The pasuk would make the same sense if it began with just a word, Hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that the reason Eila is Begematria 36. Eila, Aleph, Lamed, Hey. And that Moshe Rabbeinu was really striving in the 36 days that he spoke to Klal Yisrael to be able to provide some sort of remedy for the 36 chiyuvei koros that Klal Yisrael would end up doing, and end up, as the Gemara says, because of those 36 chiyuvei koros, that Yidden would be over, they would end up in Golus. So he was trying to give them rebuke and to pave the way to deal with these 36, like a segula, that they shouldn't fall in. Unfortunately, they did fall in, and that's the reason for the Golus that we are still in today. But says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, that's why the Eila had to be there, because the word 36, the word Begematria 36, did help a lot in paving the way and smoothing the derech that Klal Yisrael should not fall in, and the Kli Yakar adds on to this that the Totzah of 365 Losas says are weakened against Klal Yisrael, meaning that the Koyach Hara is diluted from the Samach Mem, effectively getting them to do it, because each one of them corresponds to a different day in the Torah. That means of the 365 Lavin, that each one corresponds to a day. And the day of that Chiyuvei Koros, which comes out 10 times from the 36 into 365, is helped by the fact that he spoke for the 36 days, which was to drench Klal Yisrael with the ability to be able to combat the forces of evil and Ra, not to fall into the Chiyuvei Koros. Now, if you look at the Parsha, you see that Moshe Rabbeinu, the pasuk before Sheni, says that Vivarech eschem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless you. Kochem elef piyamim, like you. So the Mefarshim ask, why this word kochem, as you? It just should say Vivarech eschem elef piyamim, thousandfold, not kiflayim, but thousandfold. you should be blessed. So the Meforshim say a very interesting thing, that there is, obviously, before Mashiach comes, a constant battle between the Ra and the Tov. And the reason that the word kochem here, because kochem means like you, what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying by saying the word kochem, that you have inherent in you the power to overcome and to subdue the koyach hara. But you have to bring it out. Don't give up. Don't say, oh, the Yetzer Hara is so big. How could I ever mount that mountain of influence and of desire and everything that goes with it? The answer is kochem, because you have in your neshama the ability that when you start to combat, like the Balatanya says, that the greatest nachas ruach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is when a yid is tempted to do an aveira, he sees that delicious chocolate bar which has in it the nuts and the marshmallow and but it's not kosher. But he's so tempted to eat it because it tastes good, and he subdues the Yetzer Hara and says, I can't do it. It's treif. I can't touch it. At that moment, says the Balatanya, he has no idea how the nachas ruach, the pleasure that Hashem has from his subduing the Yetzer Hara and holding back from and that's coming from the word kochem. You have it in yourselves, in your ability to overcome. That is the push in that direction, to subdue and overcome that taiva that you may have. Now, also in that first parsha in this week's Sedra, it says, Be'ever hayardein hoyel Moshe be'er es haTorah hazos, that Moshe Rabbeinu, Be'ever hayardein, he began to teach you Torah. And Rashi says that there were 70 languages that he taught it in. And the Mefarshim are curious. I mean, 20 popular languages, but 70, there must be places that it's so unbelievable that there's even that Yidden that live there. So the Mefarshim say a very interesting thing, that when a Yid moves to Montana and wants to learn Torah, he may be one of 50 in the whole state that want to learn Torah Lishma. He, with his brother who is in Zimbabwe, and whatever language they speak there, are able to understand their native language, and that the Torah, if they learn it in that language, should seep into their neshama. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu said it in 70 languages, which dispersed and dispensed the power of learning, but not just superficially, because, for instance, we say all the time, Yesh chochma bagoyim tamen, that you can say that there's chochma. In other words, you have some professors that they've written 10 books in geometry. We can't say that he's not knowledgeable or intellectual or sophisticated or knowledgeable. He has the knowledge. but it's all on the surface. He's a chacham, yesh chachma bagoyim tamen. But it's all surface. To seep into neshama and to transform every aspect of his being is by Torah, by Kedusha. And that allows him to, but how living in Zimbabwe does it happen, and this metamorphosis of his whole mahus and his ruchnius take transformation and move forward in it and is drenched with it? The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu said it in 70 languages to enable any person in any place, wherever he may be, with whatever language, the ability to be able to have the gateways of his neshama opened and to drench and to devour the koyach HaTorah and the words in it. Now, we know, for instance, that Tisha B'Av, which is this next Motzoi Shabbos, I'm speaking now, the past few minutes, about Devarim, which we're going to learn this Shabbos and read Chazon, the Haftorah, beginning with Chazon, and go in Motzoi Shabbos. Now, Motzoi Shabbos is not a nidcha. That means there's certain kulos that apply leniencies if it was Shabbos and it just pushed off to the next day. But it's actual Tisha B'Av. And therefore, Motzoi Tisha B'Av, when it comes Sunday night, we can't immediately take a haircut or immediately wash clothes. We have to wait till after Chatzos the next day, till after 103 or 104, whatever the exact moment of Chatzos is. And some hold you have to wait the half hour extra. When we, let's say, daven mincha, Chatzos today is 102. We didn't start mincha till 138. We wait because, first of all, the Bach holds that still a zman, and therefore, if someone wanted to daven Shemona Esrei, and the last zman, let's say, of Chatzos, like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein holds, it's 56, 12:56, every day of the year, except when there's short days, so it's 11:56. But he made a cheshbon exactly to prove that it's 12, that's the 56th minute is Chatzos. Now we know the Baal Shem Tov and the I'm just slipping on the name, but a famous posek, and I'll think of it in a minute, hold that once you say the bracha baruch of Shemona Esrei, you're under the fence. You're in, even if you didn't say the whole Shemona Esrei yet. And that's, of course, a b'di'evid, but we at least get in. But the Bach held that for the next 34 minutes, you're allowed to say Shemona Esrei, and you're still before Chatzos. And we paskin our daily lives, our kitchens, our everything, is half like the Bach. He paskins for whole Klal Yisrael for the last 380 years since he lived. For Klal Yisrael, how they should be noig and what the psak halacha is. Now, every Yom Tiv, whatever the halacha is, the night, let's say Pesach, the day doesn't change for 25 hours. That means whatever you're allowed to do the first hour at night of Pesach, you're allowed to do the last hour of the first day. Yeah. It says no Yom Tov that changes the halachas in the middle except for Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, come mincha, you can sit up on a chair, you can put on talis and tefillin. Rebbes put on their talis and tefillin by Shachris, but for the Klal Yisrael, we put on our talis and tefillin by mincha time. And that's the halacha. So these halachas that we have change in their format on Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av, as the Bnei Yissaschar explains in detail, the mahus of the day changes. And Mashiach is born in every generation, waiting for Hashem to tell him to reveal himself. But it's on Tisha B'Av, after Mincha, in the time of Mincha, that the Ratzon of Mashiach, whoever he is, and we hope he may be from the living, but the Radvaz, Reb David ben Zimri, who was of the first of the Achronim, almost a Rishon, and very, very, very big. You see how Poskim reckoned with him and how big he was. He held that Mashiach has to come from someone that was nifter, from the dead. But whoever the Mashiach is, the Ratzon to reveal himself becomes mightier and stronger mincha on Tisha B'Av. And it's with that I told you that the Simcha of Sukkot comes from Tisha B'Av, from the 9 days. These 9 days correspond to the 9 days of Sukkot, because Sukkot is 7 days, and the last 2 days, Shmini Atzeres. Oh, the Aruch HaShulchan, sorry. It's the Aruch HaShulchan is the other opinion. If you just say the word Baruch before Chatzos, whatever Chatzos you hold, the one word Baruch brings you into, gets your foot into under the fence, and you're under the umbrella of saying the whole Shemona Esrei, quietly even, on time. Now, and since the production of Geula comes from Tisha B'Av, it's the source that it'll be the Simcha for Klal Yisrael for 400 million years afterwards. No more tsaros, no more killing, no more death, no more sickness, no more all of that. So it is strong enough to provide in Golus a sprinkling and the shoirish of Simcha for Sukkot. And that's our Zman Simcha Seinu. That's what we say. That's the yesod of those days, to bring into our lives and our hearts the emes and nekuda of Simcha. By the way, I just spoke to you about the Arizal. The Arizal said at the end of his life that he was able to accomplish whatever he had to do in Olam Hazeh because of the Simcha Shel Mitzvah. That when he did a mitzvah, it was an uphill battle to incorporate Simcha and have a frame of mind of total Simcha and do it, but he succeeded, and that's how he's able to succeed his whole life with whatever his mission was here in Olam Hazeh. Now, we know that Yirmiyahu wrote Eicha, and there's 5 Megillos, and by literature, they even read Eicha from a regular cloth like Megillah Esther. It's one of the 5 Megillos. And some even make a bracha, Al Mikra Megillah. That's by some of the very Litvisha, some do it. But for the Klal Yisrael, we say Eicha, and there are some Litvisha that say Eicha again after davening in the morning. But Chassidish don't do that. They say Eicha by night, and it was written by Yirmiyahu, and Yehoiakim, who was the king at the time when Yirmiyahu was Navi, he heard that Yirmiyahu wrote a book that was, and it was 20 years before the Churban. He heard he wrote a book of Nevuah that was projecting his kingship to come to an end, and that there would be the destruction of the Bais Hamikdash. And he summoned Yirmiyahu into his chamber, and he asked him, "Did you write such a book? I heard you wrote a book." And he said, "Yes." And he had the book with him. And Yehoiakim took the book and threw it in the fire. He said, "I don't want any predictions of destruction and that my kingdom is going to end." And that. So Yirmiyahu, it says, sat down and rewrote Eicha, that it should be there for Klal Yisrael. He saw Baruch Kodsho, that he had to project, and it was as a warning. We know they beat up Yirmiyahu. They didn't like what he was telling them. They wanted some of them to continue their sinas chinam and their this and that. Don't be our conscience of guilt. They even threw him into a boar, and they sent him off to Egypt. He had a very tough time, Yirmiyahu. But he was telling the truth, and everything, as the Arizal said, had a Kabbalah component to it. For instance, and I'll give you one example. One pasuk, he says, Eini yordamayim, that my eyes flowed tears because of the Churban. Who could stand there and see what's going on? Even though Rabbi Akiva stood outside the Kodesh Kadosh, out of the area of the Bais Hamikdash right after the Churban, and they all saw a fox come running out, the Gemara says, and all of the Tanoim that were there started to cry, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. So they asked him, "What are you laughing about?" So he said that the Navi predicted that there would be shualim hilchuva, that there were going to be foxes running out of the Kodesh Kadoshim. And of course we want to cry about it, but I want to think about the other half, the next pasuk of the Navi, that there's going to be such geula and there's going to be such redemption that I would rather concentrate and accentuate and underscore that, and that brings me to laughter. So Yirmiyahu rewrote that, and in the pasuk of Eini yordamayim says the Arizal that we know that every month it is dedicated to being metaher and mezachech another one of our Devarim. The right eye gets its transformation and elevation in the month of Tammuz. The left eye is the month of. Says the Arizal that what Yirmiyahu was referring to, Eini, that Tammuz and Av, that we do tshuva for our eyes, and the koyach hariyah, what we see, what we look at, everything about Bri'iyah, that it becomes so tahor, that's the reason Chamisha Asar B'Av, the 15th of Av, which we're going to talk much more about next week, before Chamisha Asar B'Av, that the Mishnah says that there were no Yomim Tovim in the calendar like Chamisha Asar B'Av and Yom Kippur. And the Gemara says that all the girls who had to get married used to put on white dresses, and they went out into the krumim, which means the vineyards, the vistas of landscaping, lush landscaping, and the boys went out, not together, but here were the boys, and and the boys, the girls called out to the boys Bachor saw einecha, and the most shidduchim of the year was done on Chamisha Asar B'Av. So says the Gemara. It's not some, I mean, if I would go do that in my school in the Bais Yaakov and tell the girls to call out to the boys, I would be driven out of Borough Park. But but says the Arizal that the Hara of the Eini Yordamayim brought the Bachrim to such a darga that when they looked at the girls, they saw who was Bashert for them. Who? They saw only the Kedusha. They didn't see anything negative that we would criticize them for looking. So says the Arizal, and it's the Gemara that says that the girls called out Bachar Soy Necha. So, and that the Shidduchim were done on that day. So we see that in Tammuz and Av, it's an opportunity to bring us a step closer to our avodah of purity. You know, we are all human and we are all in a state of golus, and the Yetzer Hara has picked up speed like no tomorrow. Things are happening that never happened. Happened, you know, one case in 50,000 here or there. But the taivas, I mean, just look at the telephones. What a bacher today has a wrong telephone, what he can do and what he can become. In 1 hour. He didn't have access to these type of things. All this started the last 100 years. The cell phones, the videos, the televisions. So the idea of what we can accomplish in these days, and the Motzoi Tisha B'Av is still like the 9 days till the next day. You know, there are different levels, and the more we do, when we become more ruchni, we do it for ourselves. You know, in the pasuk this week, Rashi says for Parshas Devarim, Bo, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, Bo, come to Klal Yisrael, Urishu es ha'aretz, and inherit the land. With those words, the Meforshim say, he implanted in them, Rashi brings, that they really, they not done in the Midbar all this stuff with Korach and with the Mon and with all that, they would have gone into Eretz Yisrael, they would have not needed any weaponry to conquer the land. They would have been able to walk into Eretz Yisrael, and they would have been able to have the land. It's like a bechina that a person has to have parnasa. But when the Gemara says Zocha, Melachto Nasa al Yedei Acherim, that a person could be at the Madrega, you find Rebbes, they sit in a room their whole life. And the Hasidim bring in a monthly stipend, $50. They are able to have Shabbos, and they're able to buy a beged for Yontif, and they can do it, that they have the Parnasa without working. Lo Zacha, it's not done through, you have to then be cloaked in Teva. The rule in this world, the more that you are immersed in Ruchnias, the more supernatural kicks in. And that's how tzaddikim who divested themselves of all the gashmias and everything. The Lubavitcher Rebbe once said on Reb Aaron Belzer that he was a tzura b'li choimer. That means he was an image without any gashmias to him. He said such a thing. Now these were tzaddikim that were not chanfa, they didn't have to impress, they were not out for the covet, for the money, when they made such a statement, they meant it 1,000%. Because once somebody divests themselves of the gashmiyas, then his ruchnius is so high that the laws of Gashmius are pushed aside and they supersede. That's how they could look at someone and know what's doing by him and give a bracha, and it should effectuate him because they're chutz l'derech hateva, and that's tzaddikim gemurim. But we ourselves are able to elevate ourselves, that we have times that make a difference. Somebody could fall and have a heart attack, lo aleinu, lo aleichem. Some people die from a heart attack, and some people survive and go on to live 25 years. And there could be a schus hanging over that person who lives the extra 25 years, that he was able to supersede the natural happenings of what's going on and lived the next 25 years. And it could be a simple person, that he did one thing that was so big, like the Gemara says, that somebody, one of the Amoraim, asked Mashiach in a marketplace, and he answered and said that when Klal Yisrael is doing the Ratzon of Hashem, but also he asked that anybody here in this tzibur, in this marketplace, that's zoicha to olam haba. And he pointed to two people that were walking around telling jokes. He said, those two that are bringing people out of their tzoros for the minute or 5 minutes, and that they're laughing and smiling, those two are going to olam haba straight. The Gemara says this. It's not from a Maisa Bichel or something, it's a Gemara. So when we do an act of kindness or a mitzvah, and we uplift ourselves and someone else, you can come into Eretz Yisrael that you don't have to worry about the Gashmias in any which way, that you're able to elevate. And I told you before with Rabbi Yehoshua of Bells, and that he said, go to Lita, and that Rabbi Yaakov Yosef came, he was Matayer, whatever he touched, that it says from Kadmonim, from that generation, that Reb Zushya and Rav Elimelech, the two famous brothers, they went out into Golos. And wherever they went, the Haskalah, the Enlightenment movement, never came. And when they got up to Auschwitz, which is the city that they ended their Golos, they saw that the Samach Mem's koyach was so powerful that they couldn't undertake it, they went back. But wherever they went, they eradicated that koyach hara. They took on an immense battle with the Samach Mem and didn't eliminate. Till Mashiach comes, it's not eliminated. But to go from 85 or 95% down to 15%. And that's what they went out into Golos. They didn't go out into Golos to have a tour of the cities and the countries and see what the mountains look like and all of that. Every step they took, they were battling the Samach Mem Ledoros for Klal Yisrael. And that's why Rabbi Yehoshua of Bel said that he cannot go to America to live, because none of the Talmidim and Hasidim of the Baal Shem Tov lived in America. Had they lived there, they would have eradicated and paved the way that somebody else could come, even though it's not totally eliminated, but they can at least build on the eradication of so much of the Samach Mem that it should enable them to be able to succeed in uplifting the Yidden who live there. So I want to wish everyone, I will not be speaking to you before Tisha B'Av. This is the shir before Tisha B'Av. We should have an easy fast. We shouldn't have to fast. Mashiach comes in 1 second. We're standing in front of the Koisel Amaravi. It happens, you know that it was talking to Noam Elimelech, who once cried by Tikkun Chatzos, and he said that Nebuch, the first Bais HaMikdash, was built by Shlomo, and the second Bais HaMikdash was built by Ezra. But the third is not going to be built down here. It's going to come flying down from heaven, a finished product. So in 1 minute, the whole Klal Yisrael could be brought al Kanfei Nesharim and standing by the Bais HaMikdash, and that we have Tahara because Tumah is Hutcha B'tzibur. And he lamented and said he feels he did not contribute even the cement of the bricks with his avodah. So that night, and Rav Zevin brings this story, that night he had a dream, the Noam Elimelech, and they showed him that not only did you contribute with your avodah cement for the bricks, but complete kalim, complete vessels were created, are in the Beis HaMikdash in Shamayim, ready to come down. That you contributed through your avodah. They showed him that don't cry that you did nothing, you did a lot, and that we should be able to see the Geula Shlema B'Korov.